been to Cleveland once. Undercover city, in my opinion. Like that little district down by the river there with all the bars and stuff. Like it's, you can have a pretty good time if you're not careful in Cleveland, I feel like.
Yeah, no, it is a good city. It is sneaky good. And I've been here, I've been here now since 2003, 4 full time. And it's just getting better and better. It keeps growing. I think obviously having, the Cavs with LeBron downtown, a facelift of that arena, the Monsters winning the championship, I think it was in 16. The Indians, fun team to watch. I think,
Yeah.
it's just growing. And, it is a sneaky good town.
How did you land there? How did that become home
Met
base?
my wife here, and all of a sudden I just stayed here. She had her career. I was still playing hockey at the time, and so I ended up making that move here, and then haven't left. Let's put it that way.
Did you play with play for Sumner in
I
Cleveland? Was he
did. I
there?
played parts of 2 seasons for Roy. Yep. It was been 02, 03, and 03, 04. So way
He's a good
back.
dude, man. He's
Great guy.
different. Like, yeah, I was gonna say, how was that? Because he seems like everybody talks about players coach, but he seems like the ultimate players coach.
He was, and that's what he was about. And David Cuniff was his assistant coach at the time. He ran the D. So Cunny was fantastic on the ice stuff. But Roy just, he brought everyone together. It was all about family for him. It was all about the guys making sure they were in sync. And whether it was at the arena, away from the arena, he was big on group outings together as a team. So that's what I remember from Roy. Just again, just creating that culture, from him.
Did he take you guys on a camping trip? Because I think he did that with when he was with San Jose. That was an annual. I don't know if they went to Montana or something, but it was like no phones. Like it was just the boys.
No, we didn't do any of that. I think he lives out in Montana, and so I'm sure he knows all the cool spots, especially when they got out west. So we didn't get to do that though.
What? So in your time in Cleveland, what's been the best sporting experience you've taken in live, or maybe best sporting moment you've taken in live and in person?
You know what? I was actually coaching in Toledo, and fortunate enough, the GMs of the Toledo building, GM of the Cleveland building know each other. There was a connection there. And anyways, I was able to my wife and I were able to take in game 4 of one of the finals. Cleveland did not win, but it was one of the ones against Golden State. They won that game to continue on, to continue the series on. I know they lost the series, but it was pretty cool. We were 6 rows from the floor, right behind the Cavs bench. So it was pretty neat, to be honest with you. It was a cool experience just to see the energy inside the arena. It was awesome.
That's super cool. So you wrap up season 1. I'm sure that you probably need some time to digest it. We're a couple weeks out now. Like, how do you reflect back on it?
Well, you know what? It's been a little bit of time to think about some stuff. I think just proud of the group, proud of our coaching staff. It was all brand new. Literally, the only guy remaining on staff was Brad Dog Thompson, our equipment manager, who's been there forever. Everyone else is brand new. So, Marcus Kinney, he is strength and conditioning coach, and Jack Rummels. Those 2 guys were there as well. So they were able to help coordinate all the off-ice stuff. But in terms of hockey staff, training staff, everybody's brand new. So I think the first, probably month, 2 months, it was really a learning curve for everyone. How we wanted our day-to-day operations to function, what time everyone's getting in, the workflow of our staff, that was all brand new. And then you add in a ton of prospects, a bunch of new players onto that. And I honestly felt like, just to get the culture behind the closed doors, everyone says culture, what's that? What does that look like? To get that up and going, that was tough off the start. But once we got it going, after Christmas, I thought we were in a flow. And the reason why we had a good second half, but overall, just proud of the group for how we did that. Coaching staff, athletic training staff, equipment staff, and our players. It certainly was a work in progress. We were able to get that down.
Well, you say that, and the numbers here, because there's obviously on the AHL site, there's shootout losses, overtime losses. So this is maybe a little bit skewed, but I was just going through your schedule and you talk about, kind of the tale of two halves. So at Christmas time, your group is 9-17. Again, granted, there's some
Yep.
shootout overtime losses in there. You finish the season at 37-23, 8-4. So without going through every single game, it would seem it just seemed like there was like almost like a line drawn in the sand where a different team showed up and you guys really got rolling down the stretch.
It
What do you
was.
point to?
I think honestly we had some good discussions right before Christmas. And I think that heading into Christmas break, we played Texas, who at that time was the top team in our division. They had it rolling offensively. They're very dynamic. We had talks, and although we didn't, our points probably show we weren't great in those 4 games, I could see our work ethic, our compete level, our care level for one another increase and rise. And we didn't get the results we wanted by any means, but I could just see that starting to develop. We got to go home for Christmas, so we had a nice long break, 4 or 5 day break. Kind of a reset. Let's hit the reset button. Let's get back out there and see what we have. We came out of Christmas with a 5 game winning streak. I could see sort of the rejuvenation or kind of the excitement around the locker room after Christmas. And I really
Yeah.
believe that just having some discussions, being open with one another, making sure there's clarity amongst the room certainly helped us get through that second half and start out strong. And I think that really got the belief going, the confidence going in the players. And that's what kind of led us onto that path of the second half.
You mentioned like just sort of the processes or sort of, culture. And I think that as the word culture gets thrown around more and more, it gets closer and closer linked to just behavior and
Yep.
how you operate. And, I'll look at ourselves at the coaches side. Like we're a small team, but we're twice the size today as we were 12 months ago. And my number one observation, it used to be if we said, hey, we're going to do a meeting differently, or this is how we're going to post something on Twitter. This is the process we go through. It used to happen almost like that. It was
Right.
quick. Now you can just sense like the bigger your team gets, the more new faces, the adoption rate or the amount of runway you need increases. So, just the fact that you're coming from an organization who you had spent your entire coaching career with anyways, when you come into this new environment, new faces, etc., what might have been some of maybe the workflow things where you're like, hey, like to you is probably just like tying your shoe.
Yep.
But when you get new people, it's like, hey, this there needs to be some, call it training or just sort of an onboarding process to get rolling.
Yeah, I think for the staff, especially, it was how does everyone see the game? We had conversations throughout the summer
Yeah.
before it joins, but how does Steph Julian see the game? How does Brian Lafshoff, who just retired, coming on the bench the first time, how does he see the game? What does our video coach need for him to do his job the best way? Our goalie coach coming over from
Yeah.
Finland. There's a lot of new things happening. So again, it was just us trying to figure out what that looks like. Who is going to be responsible? We had our roles. We knew what responsibilities were going to be. What does that look like? We don't need to all watch the first, second, third period. So who's going to break this up? What does this look like? But you have to get into games to get doing that. And at the start of every season, there's not a lot of hockey played in October, November. It usually starts rolling once December hits. So there was a little bit of that. And then the players, for me as the head coach, basically in terms of culture, it's what are you going to allow? So what are you going to promote? And what are you going to permit? What are we going to allow to happen? What do we want to happen? And what are you going to get rid of? And I think, for me, trying to change the culture, those are some of the big questions we had to filter through. And what were the guys going to be allowed to get away with? What weren't they going to be allowed to get away with from a coach's side of it? Then as a leadership side of it, what are they going to allow inside that locker room as players? What are the captains, the assistant captains, the leadership group? What are they going to allow the young guys to get away with? What are they not going to allow them to get away with? How do they want that to run? So if you look at it, you have the coaches side of it and the staff side of it. You've got the coaches side of it to players. And you also have players to players. There's a lot of different relationships that had to be built, a lot of different processes put in place. But at the end of the day, for me, to sum my culture up is what are you going to promote, what are you going to permit, and what are you going to not allow? Like what are you going to get rid of that maybe you don't want inside the locker room, you don't want on the bench to happen, your practice habits. What does that look like? And a lot goes into that.
Yeah, that's a great framework, and I haven't heard that before. That's awesome. And I could see how, like, if somebody was listening to this and they hadn't been involved in a team before, it would probably be like, well, that's everybody would want the same things. It's pretty obvious. But like, man, I can remember in junior hockey, going through the exercise of telling players like, hey, the captains, you figure out how you want the equipment laid out in the stall. You make that decision. You're going to let the players know. Well, I'm like, that's going to be a 3-minute discussion. Like, they're in there for an hour thinking about
Right.
that, and it's good. They're taking it seriously, but there's so many different ways you can do it. You talk about practice habits.
Yep.
What might be, like, if we asked your players, what would they say? Oh man, like Coach Watson's like on us about these 2 or 3 things all the time.
Well, I think it's the details, number one. And with that said, it's for me, the details and the habits within each drill are very important. Yeah, then you have the execution side of it. You have to, the players all don't know why. Why are we doing this drill? They don't want to do easy warm up drills. Why are we doing this shooting drill to start the practice? Why are we doing D zone today? And so for me, it's the execution of the drill. It's the details within the drill. And then again, the pace of practice. And again, you can be out there for an hour and a half, 2 hours and get the same amount accomplished as you can in 40 minutes. It's how you run your practice. And I thought our guys did a really good job of getting a lot of work done in a short amount of time. With that said, we were out there, even playoffs, we had roughly 30-minute practices with special
Yeah.
teams. At the start of the
Wow.
year, we were an hour and 15 probably. With that said, there's some skill-based drills involved, skating-based drills involved, but our guys put the work in. So the work ethic in practice, the execution of the drills, and the details within the drills are big contributors to, I think, why we had success.
Is that something like, I mean, if if I'm a minor hockey coach and I get my 2 hours a week, I'm not going to narrow practice down to 30 minutes. I'm going to take my 2 hours. However, for other coaches, maybe at higher levels, could that maybe be a bit of a measuring stick to say, hey, you might start out an hour and 15, but one of the ways to measure progress with your group is, can you go out and get the same amount of work done and create an environment where the pace, the attention, like everybody's moving, and the in syncness that could be measured in the time that you're on the ice.
Yeah, I think so. I think you can run a quality practice and quality drills. Like I said, we start out an hour and 15. These are probably a lot of new drills for the guys, a lot of new verbiage for the guys to learn, a lot to process. Now you mix in skills and skating coaches before and after practice. Now your length gets a little bit longer. And like I said, we are toning it down. Days before games, we were probably 15 minutes or less, but on the non-days before games, it probably still was 30 minutes, just trying to make sure we work in what we need to. But I just think the quality of practice, they become sharper. They understand the drills. They know the drills. So you don't have to spend as much time on the board. You don't have to spend as much time explaining the drills. You just don't want to lose the detail of the drills and why they're doing it. And I think for minor hockey coaches, for even professional coaches, everybody wants to know why they're doing it. Explain why, explain what the importance of the drill is for in-game purposes, and then get after it.
I read that I don't know if this would have been your first foray into coaching. I believe it was while you were still playing in Cleveland. You got involved with I can't remember what it was called, Puck Masters, but it was a
Yep.
training center of some kind, doing a lot of like skill-based small group or one-on-one coaching. In hindsight now, has that, maybe when you talk about details, has that proven to be really valuable, that just starting out with the details? I think sometimes coaches start with those, a bigger picture drill, and it's easy just to say, hey, provided we break the puck out and we get the shot on net, we're home free. But maybe starting from that basis, understanding it's the little details and mechanics that go into it that are going to matter.
It does. And I think, you talk about Puck Masters right after I stopped playing. I retired. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I knew there was an opportunity to coach in Toledo on the table for me. But I had to figure out what I was going to do for 2 years while the building was being built in Toledo downtown, while everything was getting set up there. So Mike Wilson, former NHLer, had a Puck Masters. And so I went and worked for him. I was, quote unquote, the head coach for the 2 years. I thoroughly enjoyed working small groups and individual skills, and it was all on synthetic ice. So it wasn't on
Ah,
real ice, on
yeah,
synthetic ice, and it really breaks everything down. If you weren't a great skater, it was hard to skate on that. It was 20%
yeah.
more resistant. And then getting into it, Mike did a great job of breaking down forward skills, defense skills, individual skills that everybody's going to need. We had a skating treadmill, we had a shooting lane. So there's a
No
lot of
way.
opportunity for me to learn. And that's what I did. Again, as a hockey player, you go out there and it's shoot the puck. You go to hockey schools, they teach you how to shoot the puck. But now everything is so broken down into where your hips need to align, the force you need on your stick, all the new, like I was still using a wood stick probably at that time, teaching kids how to shoot a puck.
Yeah.
But, I do think that helped me in how detailed skills can actually be. How much detail goes into shooting a puck? How much detail goes into your skating stride? And then you start thinking back, and once you get into that setting, you start thinking back as a player. Wow, this coach is really detailed in how he explained drills. This coach was detailed in how he wanted us to play. And so now I was able to start taking and picking apart some things of coaches that I really liked that I could translate into how I wanted to coach or how I wanted to be standing behind the bench when I got to Toledo.
Have you are you able to articulate maybe any ways that you've learned or picked up over time in how you explain or communicate, say, a drill efficiently?
Yeah, I think honestly that's the tough part because when you're teaching someone a new drill, if there's a lot into, especially the system drills, you're trying to go over every single detail that you don't
Yeah.
want. So, and you're trying to pick out the most important things, I think. And then maybe the next time you do a drill, you add a little bit more detail into it. At the start of the year, when you're going through systems and you're really working on your systems, it's sort of a higher level. You're not getting right down to the nitty gritty yet. You're at high level, and maybe it's your D zone coverage, how you want to be aggressive. You want sticks on pucks. You want to protect middle ice. This is what the drill's for.
Yeah.
Now, the next time you do that drill, now it's maybe we want to be physical and end the play here going through hands.
Yeah.
Now we want to sprint out to the D in coverage and get in shot lane. So I think for me as a coach, just continually building what those drills look like. I think it's helpful for players. Or not, there's not 8, 9, 10 little details they're trying to think about in a drill. It's literally 2, 3. Now we can build on that. Once we have that down, you can go to the next detail that you need and want out of that drill.
So just to I think this is such a great teaching point, and part of it, we get so many inquiries of the coaches say coaches just want drills. Drills are awesome. But the one observation I made, talking to coaches at your level, is they're not necessarily operating going into a season with 100 drills. If I'm picking up what you're laying down, it's that you could have a drill, and over the course of the season, you might use that drill to teach a variety of different things. The players know it. You're just emphasizing a different component of it, maybe.
Absolutely. And a lot of those drills, you can start it a different way. You can end it a different
Sure.
way. You can add another component. You can, there's multiple ways to do one drill. But as long as they know the framework of what you're trying to get out of that drill, I think that's the important part of it. But yeah, we don't have we don't have 100 drills in our what we do, but we don't use that. We probably get down to our 30 drills, our 5 transition drills, our 5 D zone drills, our 3 or 4 O zone drills, and now we can start to use those, and everyone begins to know it, and now you can go out, and that's when practices, I think, become the quantity of practice versus how long you're out there for. But again, it's probably those 30 core drills that we use that the players will know, and now we can just go and do it. And now you can, like I said, you can start to do add-ons and I think puck placements or how you start a drill is important. How you finish it's going to be important. So, and we've played around with different aspects of those too. And maybe you start with a forecheck or you started with a breakout, and now you get into dumping a puck or placing a puck, and now you get into your D zone coverage, your arrivals. Where before the coach might have just placed a puck and you just start D zone right from there. So now we get more players involved, start to add it on. I think
Yeah.
that's the way you can play around with drills, so it doesn't become stale either.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. I don't know if this is true. I read this, but it wasn't on the internet. But I read that when you were in Toledo, that you lived, you commuted to and from, and it was was it 100 miles?
100
Is that
miles. Yeah.
one
Yeah.
way?
One way. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that's part of who I am. And everyone asked me about that. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't that bad, to be honest with you. But with that said, I could see how people may think that was crazy. But to me, it was just me getting up and going to work and coming home and being with the family. And that was a sacrifice I had to make because my family was making the sacrifice for me to be a coach. And so that was an easy thing for me to do. If I wanted to do it, this is what I needed to do. I'd sleep at the rink. Early on, I slept on the couch in the arena on the weekends for games.
Really?
Then once you get the head coach title, some better things come with that, whether it's an apartment or a hotel room. But again, that's part of the journey, and that's part of who I am, and the dedication side of it, the commitment side of it. I certainly was that. But again, I got up. I had a cup of coffee on the way to work. I had an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes in the car. I was able to think about what I needed to do that day and really be prepared. When I walked in the office, I knew step one, step two, step three, all the way through before we got on the ice, which is helpful. A lot of coaches get into the office early on. I found myself doing it this year. You get in, you start talking about one thing, your assistant coaches show up, you start talking about what they want to talk about, and all of a sudden you're like, I didn't get this accomplished. I need to get this done. And now you're doing it before practice or after practice, where that drive really allowed me to focus on and prepare for the day. I did practice, and then usually on the way home, it was my phone calls. At the ECHL level, you've got a lot of people to talk to. I was we had a general manager, Neil Newcomb, in Toledo, more on the business side of it. So anything hockey related, hockey ops related, I was the guy to talk to. So I usually kept all my phone calls for that afternoon drive home. So if I didn't have that afternoon phone calls, it got a little tiring. Sometimes your brain's starting to slow down a little bit. But overall, it was an opportunity for me to live at home with my family. They weren't going to make the move to Toledo, and something I had to do and wanted to do.
Okay, so I got two questions. One, if we're flying, like what's on the Dan Watson playlist for the hour and 40 minutes from Cleveland to Toledo? Are we a podcast guy? Or are we like
everything and anything you can possibly think of? Honestly, music wise, I was an open book, audio books, podcasts, silence. Honestly, silence just to think at times wasn't a bad thing either. And the odd phone call. I'm not gonna lie to you. There was some morning. I know other coaches are up early too, so I used to field some phone calls about, hey, what are you working on today, and things like that. And I was appreciative of everyone being open and honest. But yeah, I was an open book to anything, and I still am that way now. I'll listen to anything. I'll try and read as much as I can, or at least listen and to podcasts as much as I can when I have the time.
And this, when I first read this, where my mind initially went, like, particularly when you were an assistant coach with Toledo, did you get a gas card?
No.
How much of your salary was chewed up in gas?
And
you don't have to answer that.
No, I'm just trying to think in terms of, let's put it this way. I was probably losing money between,
I believe it.
Between gas, between cars. I think I went through 3 cars my first 7 years. Just the mileage you put on, the food. Again, like I wasn't eating, in ECHL, there's no breakfast, there's no lunch. So you're buying food. I wasn't a guy right now prepared. I'd make my kids' lunches. Don't always forget to make mine or take mine. Leftovers, same thing. So I wasn't overly prepared for that. But there was a lot. A lot goes in tolls. If I took the Ohio Turnpike, that's not cheap either. So a lot of times I take the route that was 10, 15 minutes longer right by the lake. And there were some fun wintertime drives, let's put it that way. But I think in being honest, in all my years there in Toledo, I had to call Nick Vitucci one time to say I wasn't making it to practice. I started the drive, we were on the lake, and the snow coming off the lake. I couldn't see the road. I had to turn around.
It's terrible there. Like
between right around Cedar Point, Sandusky area, it can get pretty bad. And I remember it was one time in all those years I had to call and say, hey, I can't make it in today, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Wow. You just said something. Is Sandusky, Ohio, a real place?
It is.
Like from Tommy Boy?
Yeah, Sandusky, Ohio. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I had no idea. I thought that was a fictional town. That's amazing.
No, it's a great spot. Cedar Point, the #1 roller coaster. We've got season passes to it. It's there. It's a good spot.
Wow. You know what I find so interesting about, and really appreciate you sharing that, Dan. But
yeah.
Like, I'm a dad. You're a dad.
Yeah.
If one of my boys came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, so I got this job, could be anything,
Yep.
and so they're gonna pay me, you know, $10 a month, but for me to get to the job and do it, it's gonna cost me $8 a month in gas and travel and all this." There's not a snowball's chance in hell I'd be like, "Yeah, go and do it." I don't care how passionate they were. I'm like, that's
Right.
a terrible idea. At the same token, myself, and I'm sure just about everybody listening to this, totally relates to your rationale to making that work. And that's amazing.
Yeah, and geez, my story. I'm sure there's other stories just like that. Guys sleeping at the
For
rink.
sure.
I've heard a few, and guys making no money. They're doing it on their own dime the first couple of years just to get your feet wet. And I understood that. I understood what the commitment it takes, where I wanted to get to. And I had a little bit of a taste in 2004, 5, and 5, 6 in Long Beach. I had some shoulder issues and couldn't play. And Malcolm Cameron at that time, my head coach, allowed me to go on the bench. I went in to watch some video with him early in the morning before practice started, and he got just got the little bit of a taste of what coaches go through, what life is like. But as a player, I love playing. Had to retire early due to a shoulder injury or 3 shoulder surgeries all in a row. That was the next closest thing to being part of something, and I loved it, and I couldn't wait to get into my coaching. And again, you kind of do what you need to do to climb that ladder, and that was one of the things I was willing to do. And again, thankful for my wife and family to support that too.
Oh man. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Is it Kim?
It is. Yep, Kim. And then we've got a daughter, Kenzie, a daughter, Eileen, and a son, Max. So we've got 3.
Wow. That's a lot of plates to keep spinning, man.
That's right.
Now, unfortunately, you're going to miss TCS Live coming up quickly here down the road, but you're going to be, I think you mentioned you're going to be with one of your daughters at a volleyball tournament in Orlando. Is that right?
Yeah. She's 16 years old, and she's got a national tournament in Orlando. All the high school games I missed this year just from being away. So it's an opportunity to be with her. My son, Max, he turns 8 while we're down there in Orlando. So I think we have some stuff planned for him. My wife and daughter will fly in on the Sunday and spend some time with us. They have a concert to go to here in Cleveland, and they're going to fly in. So, yeah, we're all making it work, and then right to the draft for 2 days, and then right to development camp. So
Wow.
basically from June 18th all the way to July 5th, I feel like I'm going to be gone again. But for good things.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so I'd be curious to know this. We're out here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
We're on the ocean, and there's a big beach volleyball community. Like you walk on the beach, and it's a thing. Like people take it really seriously. And I don't know about you, but when I watch other sports, you can't help but start picking things up. So when I watch, especially 2-on-2 beach volleyball,
Yep.
when I see that visually, I can see the comparisons to say like a 2-on-1 in the offensive zone, and just like you give the puck and then right away you want to find space, make it easy for somebody to get the puck, or in this case, the ball to you.
Yep.
When you go and watch your daughter play volleyball, and it sounds like she's obviously competitive. She's been doing this for a long time, so I'm sure you've sat in on a few volleyball practices.
Oh yeah.
What might you pull from that sport that, whether it's how they structure practice or maybe strategically how they play, that lends itself to hockey?
Well, I think, there's different offenses. You can, when you watch teams and you watch them closely, there's teams that have more of a technical type offense. There's teams that they play quick, they play fast. The attacks happen quick. They're not the big high sets way outside and everyone can read it inside the volleyball court or the gym. The ball's set literally a foot above the net and someone's coming in for a quick attack. Defensively, they're always in layers. There's always coverage behind someone else. Another thing they talk about in volleyball is, if they're not in structure, they're not set, what does that look like? And I think about hockey all the time because there's not a lot of time you are out of structure. Something happens, there's a breakdown, someone falls. What happens next? Who's there to cover that spot? Who's there to cover that position if something happens? And I think about the defensive zone. There's a breakdown in the corner. us in Grand Rapids play more of a layered style. Well, what happens if that layer falls? What happens if that layer gets picked? Who's there to cover that up? And you can see that in volleyball. Someone falls, someone's not in the right spot. Someone's chasing a ball down that's out of play. How do we get that back in? And you can see it. And so you do. Every time I watch a different sport, and I like soccer. I like to watch soccer. You can always pull something out to use and think about it. And that's more of what it is. Do you use it? Who knows? But at least you're thinking about it. You can see it, and maybe it does translate into hockey.
What would have been some areas this past year then that maybe some layers that you added to your own coaching toolbox?
Well, I think this year alone, the American League is a different animal. It's a different beast than the ECHL, and not in terms of systems. I mean, we can all run the same systems. I think just the execution of it. But I think some of the layers into neutral zone, I think, was big, and forecheck was big for me. There are two areas that maybe get overlooked a little bit. You always talk about offensive zone and defensive zone and transition a lot. Teams that want to play fast, but I think even more defensively, how do you play without the puck? Where are you positionally without the puck? And I think, whether it's volleyball, soccer, a lot of times is very similar to hockey in terms of that ball's not on your foot very often, neither is the puck. So what does a soccer team look like defending? There's always layers upon layers of people you have to get through and short passes to get through that. So I think, watching that and taking some of that into consideration allows us to defend better. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say I take exactly what they're doing and translate it, but it gets you thinking about the layers in the neutral zone, the layers in your defensive zone, the layers in your forecheck. Can you be aggressive certain times? Do you have to be patient certain times? So I think just using all of that allowed me to grow as a coach and be able to roll out different systems at different times. Again, I don't say different systems, different details within the system.
Sure.
If you're running a 1-2-2, is it going to be aggressive tonight? Is it going to be patient tonight? And you can kind of use that to however you need to against certain opponents.
Yeah, man. Soccer is interesting. We've actually got at our conference this year, Paul Vincent, who's been a development coach a long time in the NHL. His whole thing is on adapting soccer drills on the ice. And we've heard a lot of that, just coaches. I think honestly, I think it's mostly coming from YouTube. They go in there, they find soccer drills, especially the small area stuff.
Exactly.
Try and translate that. So can definitely see the correlation there. Just from players that I've coached that have gone to the American League, probably the most consistent bit of feedback and, at every level, there's competition, right? Like players are trying to get drafted, they're trying to get a scholarship, they're trying to get whatever. But it would seem that, again, this is just from what I've heard, is that environment, that dressing room, the competition's different. And maybe it's because the paycheck is such a big jump if you get the call up to the National Hockey League. But they said it took some getting used to be in an environment where it's like, hey, everybody, team first, let's go. But at the same time, it's like they still only have 5 spots on the power play.
Yeah.
And I hear that and I'm like, man, I could appreciate where that's really challenging for a player, especially a young player walking into that, and it takes some getting used to. But I could see where it's equally as much of a transition for a coach.
It is. You've got basically, and you have your set of older guys who are still trying to live out their dream of playing the NHL. And they're working, and they know their next paycheck is going to come off how many points they get. And so there's some individual goals, which I think are great. I think you do need to have individual goals within team goals. I think that's awesome. You have that group, then you have a younger group for us, a lot of prospects who, again, they're probably the best player, one of the top players on their team. And they played big minutes. They played against other teams' top lines. They played, there's a minute to go. You have a leader or you're trying to catch a team. They're on the ice. Power play, penalty, maybe not penalty, but a lot of power play. And so now it's up to us as coaches to say, hey, you're not going to be on the power play tonight, but we need you to penalty kill. Have you ever done that before? A few times. And so now you're teaching guys, new things that they haven't learned before, which is great. Because everyone's going to have to find a role on the team. Everyone's going to have to find what they're going to be good at to be in the NHL. And maybe they're not going to be the best power play guy in the NHL, but they can kill. they can skate, they're smart, they play with good detail, they anticipate plays well. All those things that a penalty killer needs that they were good at in junior on the power play, they need for the penalty kill in pro. So again, there is a lot of rotations. There was a ton of rotations for us of who was on a power play, who's going to be on a penalty kill, where do they play up and down the lineup. There's a lot. And again, I think it's because you're taking all the really good players from their respective leagues and putting them on a team, and every team is probably very similar to that. But like you said, players are probably looking around the locker room saying, oh, I played against him, and he's on the power play now. Why is he on the power play versus me? So there's a little bit of that going on. But I think that team first mentality that happened in December. Again, those 4 games before Christmas, the locker room had a good talk. The leadership group had a good talk, and it all came together for us.
Yeah, I was just funny. I was just looking on Elite Prospects at your roster there, and apologize for video popped up.
All good.
I was looking at and I look at that. It never occurred to me really the cross section of, you talk about the players, and I mean, again, just as you say, and then you look at the roster and you can really appreciate it. Just that the difference between a 21-year-old in that league and just the life that they live and their aspirations, and and a 29 or 30-year-old, that must be just a giant chasm. Does that just, dealing with that, you talk about the conversations, is that just a process of either getting more comfortable or getting a thicker skin just to have some really frank and honest conversations with people, knowing that probably with every time you get in front of the team, there's going to be people that are really happy and people that aren't so happy?
Yeah. I mean, when you deal with 20 plus people in a room, with different agendas, obviously the same team agenda, someone's not going to be happy. And as a coach, I think you have to live with that a little bit. Now, with that said, you still have to have a good relationship with them. You can help them through those times of adversity. But I do believe too, like, you've got to be as honest as you possibly can with these guys. So let them know where they stand. Again, you have to be clear. You want to provide as much clarity to these players as you can. So there's no one guessing, where do I stand? What's my role? Who am I playing with tonight? You want to try and be as clear as you possibly can and give them the information in a timely manner so they can process it themselves. But with that said, I think you're always going to have, it's never going to be, rosy inside that locker room where everyone's going to be totally happy and on cloud nine, unless you're, one of these Final Four teams right now who are up 3-0 in the series and staring at Calder Cup finals right now. Those are probably locker rooms that are really happy right now. With that said, there's probably guys not playing or guys not playing roles they hope to be. But that comes with trust. That comes with respect. That comes with those coaches and myself being clear and honest with these guys.
No, it's timely because tomorrow the NBA finals start, and I'll just put it on Twitter, but Jason Kidd, the Mavericks head coach, and they make a big trade in the middle of the season for Kyrie Irving, who's a superstar. Yep. They've got some other superstar players. And there was a question at his press conference this morning about how he handles that. And he referenced in 2008 playing on the U.S. Olympic team for Coach K. And he just said, what he learned from that was that, Coach K, I think at his point is like, he had the courage just to come in and have really just be so honest, so black and white. And he said it was hard, but he's like, the players at the end of the day, they appreciate that. And he goes, it's easier said than done. But he's like, that was what made him, in his opinion, such a great coach, was that he was just willing to come in there and not sugarcoat anything and just be in black and white. So I think that's really well said. And again, I understand that these are, don't expect you to go into any detail, but I'm sure that you have players on your roster this last year where maybe the projection as a Detroit Red Wings organization is like, we think this player is going to be a really good third line winger because of some of these attributes, but we think this player is going to, might potentially quarterback our power play one day. How do you look at, how you structure a practice in the environment? How do you balance that? Hey, here's what our team needs to do, but with a roster of 23 to 25 players, we've got to make sure that we cover. That's a pretty long to-do list when you spread it out that way. How do you cover all those bases and make sure that players are working on those details that might lend themselves to the role that they're projected to play?
Well, I think we're fortunate in Detroit. They provide us with all the resources we need, and I think most teams do at this point in time. But in Grand Rapids, very fortunate to have skills coaches there almost on a daily basis for the most part, and
Yeah.
they're more than willing to get out before practice and after practice. I think at the start of the year, we have a list. Hey, you five guys need to go out before practice. You five guys need to stay after practice. Anyone else is welcome to join. Halfway through the year, those lists stop because there's a lot of guys going out there at that point, especially the prospects. And now with practices, maybe we had 4 practices one week or 3 practices one week. We know what we need to work on as a team, but there's also some individual skills, whether it's taking pucks off the boards, whether it's, D pressuring a winger as he's taking a puck to make a breakout play. And you just add those little things that maybe you don't get to work on a ton into these drills. And then we had open communication with our skills coaches. Hey, these are the things these guys need to work on. This is the skating that these guys need to work on to become more effective in their play. So it really was individualized and also team oriented. And you have to use those resources, those coaches, the best way you can. And we're fortunate to we had 2 great skills coaches this year. Skating coaches would come in and work with our players as well. Resources I've never had before. And so that was a learning experience, just how to fit everybody in and get the most out of them. You can't it's hard to ask players to go out and skate for a half hour, 45 minutes and expect them to be at their best in practice and then stay out after. So we scheduled some before, some after, had a good team practice. I think everyone got better. Bottom line, everyone did get better. And, that's the biggest thing for myself as a coach and our staff. You have to be hardworking. You've got to be committed to the development process of not only younger guys, but older guys as well. And I thought our staff did a great job with that this year.
Just as you say that, like you can almost see where, your role is almost evolving over time into almost like a football coach where, it's not the Fred Shiro days where there's one coach standing behind the bench. It's, now you're managing you're managing the coaches, ensuring the message that gets relayed. And you've got all these, various specialists on staff and making sure that they each have an opportunity to make an impact. How do you measure, so, I mean, you're going to get an analytics report, you're going to see time on ice, you're going to see a whole bunch of metrics, but when it comes to, say, a player improving skating, how do is that something you would measure, or is that just like a group evaluation to say like the eyeball collectively tells us that there's improvement being made here?
Yeah, I think there's both. I think there is an analytical side of it. There's motion capture. There's different ways to do analytically. But for me, it's, seeing guys that maybe couldn't get in on a forecheck quite as good as what they were at the end of the year. Again, it's the eyeball test. Is he able to do it? For the guys, is he able to, maybe at the start of the year, he was a guy who was in and out of the lineup, or maybe wasn't playing certain positions. Now, hey, we trust this guy to go and do the work because he's put the work in, and whether that's skating, whether that's managing the puck, whether that's, being good along the walls, being heavier on the net front, there's different components, obviously, but I think the eyeball test and do you trust that player from the start of the year to the end of the year? Has he put the work in himself? So has he taken ownership of his own skill development? We've certainly supplied enough resources for him to get better and take ownership of it. He's done that. He's gotten better. Go play the games. No, you're in our lineup every night now. There's a lot of guys in our lineup towards the end of the year that at the start of the year, it wasn't I don't want to say it was a struggle. I don't think that's the right term, but they lack some skills. They lack some skating skills, and they did get better. They put the time in.
You know what? Like, I think just, again, as you say that, I think that's maybe, I think it's easy sometimes as coaches to, your first impression of a player just sticks, right? It's like, this player can't do this, or we just make that instant decision. Like they couldn't do it in October, so they can't play this role. They can't do that. But probably just to, again, another framework as a coach to say, well, your job's to make sure by February they can do this, and they can, like, how are you going to give them the tools, the solutions to get there? And I can imagine, I mean, everybody talks about, the relationship between players and coaches, but I would think that, again, just as you talk about it, that's that's where you get a really great relationship, is where a player says, man, like I know I couldn't do it in October either, but we worked together and now I can. And he had my back.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things for coaches is gaining that trust, that respect, and then the players feeling that you've got their back and you want the best out of them. You want the best for them personally, and you're going to do what it takes. And again, Steph Julian, he worked very close with all the young forwards, daily video on the ice. Same thing with Brian Lashoff and our defensemen, daily video with these guys, and then Rope Koivunen with Sebastian Kotza and Michael Hutchinson daily. I mean, it was nonstop, but these guys are passionate about their work. And so for me as the head coach, I'm very fortunate. These guys took it upon themselves. They knew what was expected. And the young guys came in and they did their work. And then we went out on the ice and performed it. And that, whether that was a skills coaches or as a team practice, they knew what they needed to get better at. They knew, what would need to be done. And they went out and did it.
I want to go back to your time in Toledo.
Yep.
And, you and I got introduced through Derek Lalonde,
Yep.
and you coached under Derek in Toledo. I read that when Derek was hired, you had interviewed for that head coaching job as well. And at that time, you were quoted as saying, like, you felt like you were ready for that step in your career. Derek gets hired. I'm assuming the two of you talk. I don't know if you had a prior relationship, but you decide to stay on. I can just see where, I mean, listen, all anybody needs to do is go on, Elite Prospects and see the CV of most coaches. And it doesn't, being 14 years in one place is not the norm. I mean, you're a bit of a unicorn,
Yeah.
but I would just be curious. I think there's a lot to be proud of there, but I think there's a lot we can all learn from that, just the ability to sort of look at the big picture and say, hey, like, it'd be, the glass is half full or half empty, right? It could be like,
Yep.
this is really going to hurt me, or, hey, this could really, maybe this could benefit me. What was your like self-talk at that point to get yourself to say, hey, that this could be an opportunity to grow versus, perhaps a wall being built in front of your.
Yeah, being there 5 years as an assistant, you start to learn all the players. You know the league inside and out. And at that time
Yeah.
when Derek was hired, it's like, I'm ready to roll here. Like, I know what I'm
Yeah.
doing. I know what I want. Let's get going. Then you don't get it, and the initial is rejection. It's like, I got to get
Sure.
out of here. I got to go find another job. They don't trust me. They don't like me. But the first call when I didn't get the job was from our team president, who I have a ton of respect for, and he's one of my mentors. And Joe Napoli, he said, "No, we want you to stay. Derek's gonna call you, and he wants to talk to you." So, being open at that point in time, like, okay, let's do this. So Derek, he ended up driving to Cleveland. He was in Toledo, drove to Cleveland. We met at a coffee shop for 2 hours probably and just talked hockey. Talked about life, talked about kind of what his plans were, why he took the job, what he's looking for an assistant. I don't think it was 24 hours later, he's calling me saying, I want you to stay. What's it going to take? We worked everything out, and that was probably the hardest but best decision of my career so far. Again, it's that whole, I'm not good enough to be a head coach, and now I'm going to be patient. I'm going to learn from another coach. Only learning from one under Nick Vitucci as an assistant, I get the opportunity to learn from another one, being Derek Lalonde, who at that time, his stock was rising. He just won a championship in the
Yeah.
USHL. He's been to Denver for 6 years there, Ferris State. So he's kind of been climbing that ladder. I'm sure he took a ton of things from different coaches that he learned
Yeah.
under. Now I was thinking I get to be fortunate enough to learn under him. Now, did I know it was going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? I had no idea how long that was going to be. With that said, the way Toledo operates, they're still allowing me to get better, providing me the resources, go to the coaches' clinics, talk to other coaches. There was no secrets behind the closed doors. It was be open, try to learn as much as you can. And so I'm thankful for that, and thankful for Derek too, for trusting that. I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to say, hey, here's a guy that's been here 5 years, didn't get the head coaching job. Hopefully he wants to stay on staff, And
Yeah.
so for good for him, because he probably could have went out and hired any one of his guys or anyone that he knew that was qualified for that job and said, "Hey, Dan Watson, thanks for your service in Toledo, but we're going a different direction." Would have been easy for him to say that, and he didn't. So our relationship started right from there. It grew right from day one. But that was, like I said, it was the hardest. Now looking back, it was probably the easiest decision I made to stay there and got that one out.
No, and I think that's a great lesson, and I mean we're seeing that. I sense. I know they always say that coaches are hired to be fired, but I think what I would observe, and I could be totally off base on this, is that it's a really it's an emotional gig, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And you see that maybe the way coaches approach it, and maybe being a bit more cerebral, a bit more calm. And I think, you can just look at some coaches like, man, like they kind of hang in there a while. And I think a lot of it's just, perhaps maybe just the temperament, the ability to build relationships, work with people, find solutions. And, frankly, a lot of the things that probably in the corporate world or, in, the regular work life,
yeah.
help people be successful. When you jump on a call in season with Newsy now, what does that look like? Like, what does he want to know in terms of what's going on in Grand Rapids?
Well, it's great because we know each other's families. So the first thing is usually, how's everything going? What do you need help with? What do you need? I see you guys have it rolling, or hey, I see you guys have lost a couple. What's going on? So he likes to feel the temperature as well, and then it quickly turns into whether it's systems, whether it's structure, why you guys having success? What's going on? Why are you guys losing? We care about what's going on with Detroit and with Grand Rapids, both of us. And that quickly turns to family. How's the family doing? Because my family stayed in Cleveland this past year, so obviously he cared about that.
Yeah.
His family the first year stayed back in Tampa, so there's kind of that correlation there. But just checking in on each other too. It becomes work to friendship. Work comes first. Or shouldn't say that. The work talk usually comes first. The hockey talk, and then it turns quickly into how's everybody doing. Say hello to the family, which is great. So, but it's fun talking hockey. It's fun to know what's going on up there. Make sure that we're still in sync in Grand Rapids to what's happening in Detroit, and then it turns to family.
Um, Dan, before we let you go, I mean, you talk about that's great, those conversations with Derek, and you
Yeah,
talked about when you're in Toledo, the conversations you might have early morning on your drive in with other coaches,
yeah,
just what they do. Like, again, I don't know if this is something you can necessarily measure, and I measure just based on the amount of conversations we have like this, and you pick up trends. But it would seem that it's really important for a coach um, to have people that you can talk to. Like, you talk about, like, at some point in the year you're going to lose three in a row,
yep,
and it's not like, I've tried to explain this to my friends. It's not like, when you're like in I don't know, some corporate gig and you don't meet the quarterly quota. Like, I'm sure that
yeah,
stings, but I know for a fact it doesn't sting like losing, going 0 for 3 on a weekend. Like,
right,
you own it, right? And so, like,
yep,
how important is it to have just friends in the industry that you can pick up, that you can talk to, that can kind of relate to what you're going through, that maybe aren't your assistant coaches, that maybe
yep.
aren't your spouse, but you can just talk.
I think it's vitally important. Again, you don't want to hold things in. You don't want to. I'll be the first guy to tell you I don't have all the answers. I'm going to try and find them. I'm going to try and find the best ones. But in order to do that, you've got to be open to communicating, open to sharing ideas, um, open to talking about it, and share the experiences you've gone through with other coaches. I think that's the way you get better too. One coach might have handled a losing streak one way. Maybe he's really hard on his players and said the only way, I've heard it. The only way to get out of this is to work. And we've done that in Grand Rapids. I've done it in Toledo. You got to work our way out of this. There's other times where coaches might have handled it by being really light, and I don't want to say making a joke out of it, or just being light around the room versus letting it be a burden,
Yeah.
and it's hard. Same thing with winning streaks. Some guys are going to say, hey, I remember in Toledo, we won 18 games in a row. No
Well,
one talked about it until 13. And then it became, hey guys, you know what's better than 13? 14. And that kind of became the mottos we kept going through those ones. We won on a 18 or 19 game point streak this year. And it was the same thing. No one really talked about it. But I also know teams that have gone on winning streaks where they rally around it and they use it as motivation and, hey, let's go get the next one and let's talk about this streak we're on, where other teams, we don't talk about it. We just go do our job for that night and hopefully the results favor us. And so again, you don't learn those unless you're talking to people and you get to go through those experiences and how to handle it different ways. And then you pick the best way that helps your group. But those early morning drives, talking to coaches regarding practices, what they're focusing on that time of year, certain drills that they're looking at, the way they, what systems they're deploying, and power play and penalty kill, how they use their staff. That was big for me.
Yeah.
Coming now to having a full-time goalie coach, and how do we use all these guys? Skills coaches, skating coaches. So for me, last summer was really important to reach out to people who have gone through it. And, I'm thankful for everyone that picked up their phone and had even 1 minute for me, let alone guys who I talked for an hour on the phone with about multiple different things. So I think it's really important as a coach to grow, to learn everyone's experiences and then use what you need that's going to best suit yourself and the group moving forward.
I want to touch on your time growing up in
Yeah.
Glencoe, Ontario.
Yeah.
Your grandfather, the
Yeah.
barbershop.
Yeah.
How many years did he have that thing?
75 years. 75 years he worked, and I can tell you, maybe that's where I get the commitment, the dedication, the resiliency from.
I think you might be onto
Yeah,
something there. Yeah.
18 years old he started and worked 75 straight years. He retired at 92, 93 years old. Still cuts hair now, every once in a while.
Still at,
But
wow.
but I tell you what, like, just again, you want to talk about someone who's probably seen it all. For him, different hairstyles going through 60s, 70s, 80s, and up to now.
Oh man, those
Um,
sideburns. Yeah.
but I tell you what, just seeing how he went to work every single day, there wasn't a day he complained, whether he was busy, whether he wasn't busy. He walked to work every morning, had his lunch, walked back to work again, walked home for dinner. Very regimented, very structured in his life, and that's something I look towards as well. And then I can even move on with my mom and dad. My mom, my grandma, my aunt owned the flower shop that was right beside my grandfather's barber shop ever since I was a kid.
No way.
So you want to talk about going to work with your family every day. Obviously, you're doing different jobs, but they saw each other every single day. And my mom was there every day. My dad was a mechanic from the time he was out of high
Yeah.
school until he just retired 2, 3 years ago. And he's 70, 72, 73 years old right now. So, I mean, he worked all the way until he was 70 years old. I mean, it's unbelievable, and very thankful that I was able to grow up in that type of atmosphere where they provide me all the life lessons. I got to watch it firsthand, how hard they work, number one, to provide for myself, my two sisters, all the sacrifices they made. And so for me, looking at that, it's like, I can make these sacrifices too. They were able to get through it and look what they did. I can get through it to look where I need to get to. It was right there in front of me as I was growing up.
So I was reading that, and we'll share the art. It's awesome. Like, and it was really cool. But I think the two things that I maybe drew a line to was just like the maybe undercover education of a coach. One being, your grandfather who's cutting hair. You got to have conversations with different types of people all day. You gotta find a way to make them, to relate.
Oh yeah.
And man, is that ever a part of coaching? And then with your father being a mechanic, and I'm sure I'm missing something with your mom. I'm just not as familiar with the floral industry, but with your dad, like, I'm sure a big part of that gig is cars change. Like you got to learn new skills. Like, just same thing as coaching, like systems change. You have to constantly problem solve and figure out ways to get caught up, or can't work on cars anymore. You can't coach hockey teams anymore.
No, and that's my grandfather. I've sat in the barbershop when I was a kid. I just go sit there with him, and again, you'd have small community. So you'd have the lawyer walk in, need a haircut. You'd also have the farmer sitting in there that needs his haircut. You'd have a businessman traveling through that small town that heard about my grandfather. He wants a haircut. So he's having multiple conversations with all these people. I remember he sat down, he used to read the London Free Press cover to cover every morning. And, and he still does. And he would still just read that. and then he'd have all these different conversations with everybody. He knew a little about a lot, and then obviously had things he was very interested in. But I still sit there and I still remember those conversations for hours on end. And haircuts 15, 20 minutes, and he's out the door. Next person, and you got to change it up.
Yeah.
And he was great at
Oh,
that. And then
man.
with my dad, I still remember him as a kid. He'd have to go away 2 or 3 days, or he'd have to study for tests because he has to be qualified for
Oh,
this.
I know. Really? Yeah.
He needs a qualification and certification for this type of whatever he's working on there, and this engine, that engine. And I still remember him having to study and do some of that as he's 40, 50 years old, still having all these qualifications and certifications yearly. And again, that's just sticking up with the times. You have to adapt. You have to, otherwise, you can't be working on cars made in the 80s your entire life, or tractors or buses. He worked on them all. And so again, he was versatile. Let's put it that way. And he
Yeah.
could work with a bunch of different things. I think you can translate that to coaching. You've got to be versatile. There's different types of people, different types of players from all different backgrounds, from countries, and you've got to be willing to learn a little bit about what they're going through, and why they're there playing for you.
Yeah. That's really cool, man. That's really cool. Last one, Dan. So we're
Yeah,
going to Orlando. We got some birthday
yeah,
celebrations. We're going to try and win a
yeah,
national title here. It sounds like we got to go to Vegas. I'm sure that'll be no fun for the draft. But then I would say that, I appreciate at your level, man, July and August, that's prime reset, getting better time. Whether it's a book, a podcast, whatever. What might be some examples, some ways where you're kind of sort of earmarked and say, I'm going to invest some time in this thing to try and get a little bit better?
yeah. It's learning. You're always constantly learning. So now you start to hit the video projects. You start studying teams that had success, why they had success, how they're having it. Are they doing something different, something new? I do like to read books, and for me, it's not about coaching hockey. It's leadership. It's
What's on your
managing.
nightstand?
It's managing people. What's on my nightstand right now?
Yeah. What do we
You
got?
want to see? You want to see what books I have here right now?
Yeah, I can do that. That's what,
Old school ones. Why teams win.
yeah.
Another one that I really really like is You Win in the Locker Room First. Easy reads, but a
Who's
lot of
that?
good messaging. This is John Gordon.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this one actually Sean Horkoff brought. It's called Stay Sane. Just dealing with different things mentally, how you stay engaged. A lot of good books to read, that's for sure. But those are the three right now I've got here. And then I will listen to some podcasts, watch anything you can get from a coach. I'll watch. What I also watch is press conferences before series start, after games, just to see what they're dealing with, and whether it's a bad call on the ice. I remember St. Louis game 6, I think it was, or game 5, a bad call. I remember Craig Berube sitting up there. He's like, it's over with. All we can do is focus on the next game, and in the heat of the moment, you're in the Stanley Cup finals and a bad call goes against you. And he's sitting up there saying, don't worry about it. We move on. It's the next game. I know I'd be fired up. I'm sure maybe internally he was, but little things like that you can take out of press conferences too, of how coaches handle different situations. And that one's always stuck with me because I'm like, the heat of the moment, it's right there in front of you. You're trying to win the best trophy in all of sports, and that game may have been lost because of a bad call on the ice. And he handled it. Don't worry about it. We had another game to play. It wasn't the last game we played. We're going to try and win the last game we played. Just good stuff. And so again, you're always seeking to learn more as a coach. You should be. You don't want to become stale, and don't want to fall behind the times. You want to stay ahead of that curve, and that's all I'll try and do July and August before the new season starts.
Oh man, I love it. I wrote down to stay sane, and yeah, just to I'm sure I've told this story on the show before, but you talk about the press conferences. Um, I can remember. Do you know Troy Ward? Is that
Yep.
name? He coached in Toledo
Yep.
before when they were the Storm, right? Before,
Toledo Storm. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, won a championship there. So I brought him. I was doing a camp in Seoul, Korea, and so
Okay.
I bring Troy to Korea with me. So we're in this like little 2-bedroom apartment, and there's the time change, and Troy sleeps about 37 minutes a night
Right.
on a good night. But so I would wake up and I'd go in the living room, and there's Troy, and he's on his iPad. iPads had just come out at this point, and he's watching. He's got a cup of coffee, and he's watching. He's on the Game Center, and he's watching press conferences. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like,
Right.
"I'm watching press conferences." And I'm like, which one? He's like, "All of them." I'm like,
Yeah.
"You watch every post game press conference like every morning." And he was looking at me like it was like he was trying to explain to me the benefits of brushing your teeth. Like
Right. Right.
I'm like, he's like, yeah, he's like, this is how you get better. He's like, this is where you get better as a coach. This is where you see the difference. And I'm like, it didn't at the time. I was like, you're nuts. But the longer I'm like, there's a lot, like how you spin that message is just that's half the battle, is controlling the narrative. So yeah, a lot to be said for that. Dan, this has been long overdue.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we got to
Appreciate it.
connect, man. I really enjoyed learning about just your story, and as you put your journey. It's been really cool, and have a great summer. Have fun in Orlando, and see you next year, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on. Like you said, it's way overdue, and thoroughly enjoyed my time here today.